Okay, who is leaking information to the CIA from inside the White House?
Howard Hunt did have an office in the White House, all right? You had Butterfield there.
Butterfield was CIA?
Well, I'd say personally that Butterfield probably had a good possibility that he had an association with CIA officials. You had General Haig.
General Haig had ties to the CIA.
Yes.
Sturgis says the combined information from Hunt, Butterfield, and Haig was edited by the CIA and fed to Bennett, who then gave most of it to Bob Woodward of the Washington Post. Sturgis goes on to say that the decision to politically ruin Nixon was made after Nixon demanded to see CIA files on the Bay of Pigs, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and, most importantly, the file on the assassination of President Kennedy.
Several times the president asked Mr. Helms for the file, and Mr. Helms refused direct order from the President of the United States.
Why? What good would that do Richard Nixon to get those files?
I believe that Nixon would have uncovered the true facts that had been covered up for many years about the assassination of the president. It would take the heat off of him on Watergate.
Do you think that Richard Nixon was ever in any physical danger?
Yes, absolutely. He's lucky he didn't get killed. He's lucky he didn't get assassinated like President Kennedy got assassinated.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. He's spot on there with some long-haired, obscure Dallas reporter. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny because he looks the same, but he's still kind of a dick in a good way. You know what I mean? In a reporter kind of way. He's still harsh. It's still harsh, Bill O'Reilly. I think that was when he was based out of Dallas as a reporter, O'Reilly, in the 70s.
Had to be, 70s.
Right, late 70s, because he gets involved with George DeMornschild. He goes to Palm Beach, supposedly knocks on his door moments after DeMornschild had done something to himself, which we won't discuss here. But you can watch it in the. Do we have a DeMornschild?
We do have a George DeMornschild
we can find
episode.
out. Fuck YouTube. We can find out on your own from one of our episodes what happens to. I'm sure it's demonetized over there because of what happened, but who knows?
It was. I don't remember if we cleared it or not, but it definitely was demonetized. Thank you, YouTube.
Somebody kept asking me in the chat, is George DeMornschild in JFK? And I said, well, no, he's not. But there's a Dutch journalist who plays him. And the guy goes, where? What scenes? I go, well, he finds a rifle. And I'm telling this guy, he goes, I can't find it. I go, bro, I can't talk to you anymore about where this character is in a movie. You got to do some homework. But anyway, yeah, DeMornschild ends up also being covered by Bill O'Reilly, who at the time was one of the leading proponents of the conspiracy to kill Kennedy. This is the time of the House Assassinations Committee hearings, where a couple of guys don't make it to the hearings who were subpoenaed. Three of them, DeMornschild, Roselli, and Giancana, all three didn't make it, but we'll get into that. This has some JFK in this episode, Eric. We could put up the special hole in the head coin for this one, because this covers a lot of terrain, is what I'm saying. It's not completely JFK, but it does back the truck up to the JFK area.
Well, I might put it both. I might put it in both playlists. It's currently in the Watergate playlist.
Like I said, the reason Eric and I are doing this is because Watergate will overlap with the JFK assassination genre. The characters will overlap. You will see that these historical events, although you've been taught in school that they're completely separate, are not. And nothing is black and white. Everything is kind of gray. Everything overlaps. Many of the characters appear in earlier versions of American history and later versions of American history, even though we're taught that these were separate worlds of Watergate and Nixon and Kennedy and LBJ. They're not. They overlap, and characters who are still alive did not disappear. They just move into different areas.
And more as you go, right?
Yeah. You'll see as we get deeper into Watergate that every single dot is connected to other dots from the other things that we've covered. That's why I wanted to do the series on Watergate.
And today's Watergate episode is on Frank Sturgis.
This just in, Frank Sturgis, who kind of looks like Burt Lancaster. We'll show that a little later on if you ever find that. There's a film called Scorpio. I'll get into it a little later, but Frank Fiorini is there. It is. We'll cover this later on. It's kind of interesting. It's Burt Lancaster, by the way. Frank Fiorini is born in Norfolk, Virginia, but at the age of 6, his family moves to Philly.
That's where I used to work, by the way. It's the next city over from where I live.
That's what I thought. Yeah, I thought it was close to you. It's military, right? Old Navy?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, he will return. They moved to Philadelphia where he's raised. I don't know. There's people all over Twitter telling me what street he lived on, for Christ's sakes. Who cares? You know what I mean? There's stuff that is not relevant when there's so much information about a person. I don't care what color pants he wore, as we call it in Hollywood. There's an old saying, that these people make you change the movie plot simply because the guy's wearing the wrong color pants, and they want to have influence on the movie. So they go, can you put him in yellow pants? You go, okay, he's in yellow pants. You happy now? By the way, a lot of news on Friday we'll be covering in Philadelphia, which apparently imploded. But anyway, so at 1942, he joins the Marines, which is a little young. And he gets to serve under a guy that I was just telling Eric about called Red Mike. Colonel Edson is a guy named Red Mike of the 1st Marine Raider Battalion. To all you Marine historians out there, this is a group that was in the shit, to put it mildly. Fiorini, who will become Frank Sturgis, and then we'll switch over to calling him Frank Sturgis, but his born name is Frank Fiorini, is in Guadalcanal and Okinawa, Eric. This is the guy he served under. This is Red Mike. This is Red Mike. This is 1st Marine Raider Battalion. For you people who know what that is, he serves honorably. He's in the battles. He's killing you-know-who's, dirty, sneaky you-know-who's, killing a lot of them. But first, he's trained by a guy in intelligence. And the guy's name is a guy we did an episode or 2 on named William Donovan. Donovan teaches, not Donovan, it might not have been Donovan per se, but the OSS organization takes in Frank Fiorini and teaches him Army intelligence work and how it's done. And then he uses this in World War II, and he gets out of World War II. He's discharged honorably, Eric, as a corporal. This guy looks familiar. It might be an episode on him.
Yeah, Bill Donovan.
Bill Donovan. The Wild Bill Donovan is the one who oversees Fiorini's intelligence training. Not just a Watergate burglar, is it, people? A little bit more than you bargained for in this episode here. This guy Fiorini might just not be part of a second-rate burglary, as it was called, the Watergate thing. We're going to get into that eventually, but Fiorini is born in 1924 and will legally change his name in 1952. I'll explain that in a second. But when he gets discharged honorably from the Army, he briefly goes to college in Norfolk, Virginia, and he joins this is really odd, he joins the Norfolk Police Department, Eric, in June 5th, 1946, after the war. And he's in there, and what does he stumble onto? Amazing amounts of police corruption. So he confronts the superiors, the captain, who tells him to let it go, forget about it. So he resigns in protest from the Norfolk Police Department at that time. And I think that was 1946. He then joins the Naval Reserve. Now, he joins the Naval Reserve while he's managing / owning the White Horse Tavern, the Top Hat nightclub in Virginia Beach, and another joint called the Havana Madrid Tavern in Norfolk. I don't think any of these are still around.
And the White Horse is still around.
The White Horse, he was the owner of the White Horse.
I've been there. I've eaten there multiple times.
In Virginia Beach?
Yes,
Okay.
but it's in the mall now. It's a Pembroke Mall, so I don't know if
1942. It's being run by Frank Fiorini. Oddly enough, yeah. How odd is that? And he's also the manager of a place called the Havana Madrid Tavern for a couple of years. Now, the reason I mention this is while he's doing this, he's in the Naval Reserve learning to fly jets. Okay, at the same time,
slacker.
Yeah, he's a slacker. And so he gets his 2 years in the Naval Reserve learning how to do this until 1946 when he resigns his Naval Reservish thing, whatever that is. And the next day, joins the United States Army. And he joins the U.S. Army, and he is sent to West Berlin, where he becomes a member of General Lucius Clay's honor guard. Now, I don't know what that means, but he is in the shit in West Berlin, coming out of Virginia now from these nightclubs, and he is now there during the Cold War, serving under General Lucius Clay, whose bona fides of the Clays in the military go back to pre-Civil War times. There may be some more historians who could trace the Clays even further back. So when he comes back from Europe, he gets a little restless. Let me put it that way. Fiorini gets a little restless. And then I said he legally changes his name in 1952 to Frank Sturgis. Now, there's some dispute as to why he changes his name to Frank Sturgis. There's a couple of different stories, but the one that makes the most sense is a book by a guy who denied knowing him at that time until his deathbed. Until he was on his deathbed, he denied knowing him, and then on his deathbed admitted that he knew him going back to the 1950s, which is when Fiorini changes his name to Frank Sturgis. And this is E. Howard Hunt. Now, E. Howard Hunt, like a lot of these guys, wants to be an author. But Hunt is a great author. This is just one of his books, Bimini Run. He writes many, many books. The pull quotes on the back of the book, we're going to I don't want to get into it too much because we're going to do a whole episode or two on E. Howard Hunt, which is a mega story. This is another cover of it. These are action novels, but really well written. The press reviews on these books are great. If you can find them, they're about $100 a piece. Now they're quite rare. But he changes his name to Frank Sturgis in 1952. Wait a second. I may have a little thing on the book, the Bimini book. Oh, Bimini Run, yeah. Back death orders. This guy ostensibly is hired to skipper a yacht in its deadly hunt for the giant manta ray, but his was actually a lot more dangerous assignment to act as stud for the lovely Leslie Crawford. It goes on and on and on. I don't want to give the book away, but the star of the book, the protagonist of the book, is a cat named Hank Sturgis. Frank Sturgis. Hank Sturgis. Now, Hunt will deny knowing Fiorini for years and years and years. Sturgis, of course, will say that Hunt was his leader on all these things, including the two of them working on the Bay of Pigs, where Hunt's code name was Eduardo. Hunt was a boss above, obviously above Fiorini. Fiorini will turn out to be a contract employee of the CIA, while Hunt will be a full-time employee. The difference really needs to be understood. This is a great photo of Hunt being a spy. I mean, this guy really embraced his life. He was not one to shuck his responsibility for adventure and fantasy, but Hunt was.
Everybody goes to Congress with sunglasses on.
Right, Hunt was the real deal. He really was. Anyway, so in '56, Sturgis moves to Cuba. He's restless, he says, as most people are, during the Cold War. He's restless, and he becomes a soldier of fortune. But that's not before he goes to Mexico, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Panama, Honduras, and Venezuela, where he, in the embassy in Santiago, Chile, will finally meet his employers, the CIA. Now, he will have over 30 aliases. He will train guerrillas in 12 countries, 3 continents, spearhead assassinations in Cuba, Panama, Guatemala, Haiti, and my favorite is the Trujillo one in the Dominican Republic, all orchestrated by Frank Sturgis. Okay, now call him Frank Sturgis, I guess, because he legally changed his name in 1952. So we can move over to it now. He was also known as Fred Frank Fiorini, Attila Frank Sturgis, Anthony Sturgis, Edward Joseph Hamilton. He had literally over 30 different aliases and IDs for tons more.
Is this true that he had a wife named Wilma and a pet named Dino?
I don't know anything about that, but the reality of it is he hooks up in 1958 with the CIA and gets involved with gun running. Now, the gun running operation in 1958, he actually gets arrested and he's immediately released because somebody made a phone call from the State Department. But he's down there gun running and he's supporting Fidel Castro or Carlos Prio. They're quite willing to install Carlos Prio back into power. Now, Carlos Prio, to give you a little background, was overthrown by Batista and the military. Prio was corrupt, but nowhere near as corrupt as Batista. And obviously, neither one of them was a communist. They were both just corrupt, regular presidents. So Prio is fighting also to get back into power. I didn't realize this until a while ago. And Prio has guerrillas fighting for him at the same time that Castro is fighting in the mountains. Now, who's fighting with Castro? Frank Sturgis. Frank Sturgis becomes a Castro guerrilla fighting. Here's a picture of him with Fidel Castro. Castro falls in love with this guy. He's a mad dog killer with a lot of military experience, physical experience in battle. Castro loves Frank Sturgis. Castro will do things for Frank Sturgis. Frank Sturgis will do things to Fidel Castro. We're going to get to that. He is now involved in the battle to topple Batista with Fidel Castro, sewn together at the hip. So with the gun running thing, he gets involved in gun running before he actually is in battle. This is a picture. This is a little bit further down where Castro has just about wrapping up his takeover of the island, and him and Che Guevara and a couple of other Fidelistas there executed 72, I think it was 71 or 72 former Batista officials. And this is a photo of Frank Sturgis standing on the mass grave of the 72 dead officials of the Batista government. Now, a lot of people were rooting for Castro until this happened. Not just this event, the events where Castro and Guevara started to execute and mop up in a communist way all their enemies. They didn't jail them; they put them up against the wall and executed them. That's Frank Sturgis denies killing those people, but that's kind of hard to believe. Here's Castro with an old friend who will eventually lose his hands to, I think, Felix Rodriguez, right, Eric?
Something like that. I don't know. Che got taken out in Bolivia.
Yeah, and they chopped his hands off and sent him back, and Felix Rodriguez was part of that. And so was Frank Sturgis, as a matter of fact, who claims to have called the Bolivian police and said where he was and just kill him. But in 1958, there's a guy named Louis McWillie. Louis McWillie is the pit boss at the Tropicana Hotel in Havana, the gambling casino, the Tropicana. There's Louis McWillie. Louis McWillie is running the casino, so to speak. He's a pit boss, but he's in charge of the casino with the Tropicana for a guy named Meyer Lansky. Now, Lansky is running this place, and everything's going smoothly, except Castro's coming. So that's not good. So McWillie needs to help by getting some guns, and he sends a round trip airline ticket to his friend, who is his young protege. This young protege looks up to McWillie as a god. McWillie's his mentor. And this is McWillie's the pit boss for Lansky, and he gets a letter, this guy in Dallas, and he jumps on the plane. And his name is Jack Ruby. So now Jack Ruby flies to Havana to help run guns for Louis McWillie. Louis McWillie is trying to stabilize the situation along with Lansky, along with some of the other mobsters who do not want this thing to collapse. It will collapse, but at this point in time, it has not completely collapsed. Jack Ruby in 1958, this is an obscure little factoid. He writes a letter, Jack Ruby, to the unknown State Department Office of Munitions Control and Ammunition, requesting permission to negotiate the purchase of firearms from an Italian firm. So here is a record of Jack Ruby, as Jack Rubenstein, obviously, way before 1963. This is in 1958. The letter was found. In 1959, in April, Ruby takes out a safety deposit box in Dallas, and he meets with the FBI that year in 1959. You say, well, how many times could you meet with the FBI, Eric? You know what I mean? He meets with the FBI 9 times alone in 1959, documented records. And the safety deposit box is for money that is being moved back and forth by the mob for gun running to help Castro or Prio or Batista, depending on what day it is. So he gets this safety deposit box, but he writes a letter. Like I said, he's listed in the U.S. Army Intelligence Report as an arms dealer in 1959. They list, you know, Eric, how they list these arms dealers. They put out an intel report. Well, what do you know? There's Jack Rubenstein. How odd. Just a nightclub owner in Dallas, far from it. And as is Sturgis with these various nightclubs. Apparently, this is a type of cover that we saw at the Cellar, that we saw at the Carousel, that we see with Bobby Baker and the motels in Maryland. I mean, we've seen this repeatedly. And Fiorini's also connected to a guy we mentioned last week, Charlie the Blade Torreen out of D.C., who is the muscle for the D.C. Godfather, who will run the call girl ring of the White House that we mentioned last week. And a lot of this is all designed to get the Nixon administration to accept millions of dollars in an attempt to pardon Jimmy Hoffa, which works. So you've got these different lines of communication going for different reasons at that time for different stuff. Sam Giancana's down there. He's living in Mexico, Giancana, and we'll get into that in a little while. But I just wanted to cover the Ruby thing. There's Torreen on the top. That's Nesline on the bottom. His boss. We'll get into that. But now in history, they tried to farm out the assassination of Castro. Now they've assassinated a lot of people, Sturgis and his crew. They've done this with the mob, without the mob, different methods, and they meet to talk about the assassination of Castro. And the mob comes in and says, and this is Trafficante, he comes into it, and they say, look, we can't just have a guy kill him. The guy's never going to get out alive. It would be a suicide mission, and we're not a political group. We're here to get gambling and money back. And they come up with the idea of poisoning. And that's where all of those failed attempts, the reason they tried all those crazy attempts was they knew they could never get a guy like Jack Ruby who kills Oswald. That's never going to happen with Castro. So they try to come up with all these offbeat things, embarrassing themselves, probably with Sidney Gottlieb, our old friend here, who develops a couple of pills that are going to come into play in this story. But I want to get back to how Castro gets this far, because he's with Castro, Fiorini loses his United States citizenship. That's taken away from him because of fighting with Fidel, which is kind of odd. He'll get it back later, when he tries to kill Fidel, but apparently loses his citizenship, and I guess they consider him a Cuban citizen or something. I'm not really sure about the legality of it. But a ship pulls in, I mean, an ocean liner pulls into Cuba from Germany. And all these people are German, a lot of Germans involved in this. So the Germans are big down there in the Mediterranean after World War II. Not the Mediterranean, the Bahama area, the Caribbean. So the guy is named Heinrich. There's a guy who's a captain of this ocean liner named Heinrich Lorenz. Now, Heinrich Lorenz pulls his ocean liner with tourists into Cuba, into Havana Harbor. So who goes down to meet them? Fidel Castro in his fatigues with Che and everybody else, welcoming the new tourists to Cuba. Now, keep in mind, he has not declared himself to be a communist yet. He goes on Meet the Press. He comes to New York and goes on Meet the Press. I don't know if you have a little clip of him on Meet the Press. He is literally on the Sunday talk shows, Castro, speaking English to the reporters on Meet the Press.
Yes, I have it. Hang on.
Oh, okay. That's cool.
I want to know where your heart lies in the struggle between communism and democracy. Whose side? Where is your heart? And where is your feeling?
Really, saying that democracy. Democracy is my idea, really. But many people used to call democracy seeing things that are not democracy. Democracy have some failings, not the idea. Those who use some of those who use democracy were. I am not communism. I am not agree with communism. My acts prove free press in Cuba. As you know, we have the full power in Cuba. Revolution destroyed all the enemy army after a hard fight. And when we took the power, which were our systems? Free press to everybody, free ideas, free religion belief, and all those rights, those human rights that we could establish in the most abnormal,
abnormal.
In the irregular circumstance of the changing from one system to other. There is no doubt for me between democracy and communism. But not only democracy as a word. That is why we call our ideals humanism, because we not only want to give freedoms to the people, but to give the way of getting their life, to eat, to live. Not only theoretical.
Yeah, I met those people. They didn't feel very human.
Right. This guy got bullshit that doesn't quit. I mean, Castro, of course, Fidel Castro there, I think at the age of 33. Great pitcher for the Cuban team, by the way. Love the game, love baseball, been very, very good to him. But man, that guy could talk his ass off. Now, the reason I mention this is because we'll show this in a second, but in the green room at that event, in the green room at NBC for Meet the Press, was a guy named Frank Sturgis who came to New York with him. Just so you know. Wow. Okay. So getting back to the ocean liner that comes into Havana, there's a guy, again, we showed this last week with Heidi and Reichen and her German submarine commander father. We also had this with a woman who was killed in the Baldwin incident, whose father was a submarine commander. And yeah, we have another ocean ship commander. And this is over here. This is the father. This is Heinrich Lorenz, who we're going to get into here. Heinrich Lorenz, the ship is greeted, like I said, by Castro. And he sees a 20-year-old girl on there named Marita. Now, Marita's half German. I always thought she was Spanish. She's half American and half German. I didn't know that. This is Marita Lorenz. She looks kind of Germanic in that photo. Supposedly to be played by Jennifer Lawrence in a film that I don't know what happened to it. It was in development 3 or 4 years ago. I think it's kind of been pushed back at this point. But there was another one, I think, with Gabrielle Anwar in 1990. Somebody played her. She wrote a book. But here she is with Fidel. So dig this. Fidel says, right in front of her father, he says, I'd like to give your daughter a job working in my administration. And the father says, oh, no, Marita's got to go back to Berlin. By the way, the name of the ship is the SS Berlin. He says, Marita, my daughter's only 20, sir. I know you're the dictator of an island nation who wants her, but my daughter has to go back to school in Berlin. So as they're about to leave, she slips Castro a note of an address on the Upper East Side of Manhattan where her brother lives. And she says, in the note, I will be staying here for the next couple of months at my brother's place. Well, Castro sends a bunch of guys up to New York, and they say, we've got a plane waiting at LaGuardia. I swear to God, you can't make this up. Castro sends a couple of guys up to New York. They knock on her door, the brother's apartment on the Upper East Side, probably in Yorkville, where I used to live, which is a German neighborhood. And they say, we got a plane on the runway for Cuban Airlines, Air Cuba, or Cuban Air, to fly you to Havana. And she goes, well, I'm 20 years old. What could go wrong? So she gets on the plane, flies to Cuba with these guys, and has this torrid love affair with Fidel Castro, getting pregnant, and then apparently, according to her, being drugged and a forced abortion. I don't know if that's true. She claims it was. It may have been her desire, maybe both. I don't really know. But anyway, it didn't go well for her with Castro, who she was madly in love with. And she meets a guy named Frank Sturgis. Wouldn't you know it? So Frank Sturgis begins to work on her, saying, you know, if you don't mind, you have access to Castro that we don't. This is Frank Sturgis with Marita Lorenz. They will have a love-hate relationship for many, many years. He convinces Marita Lorenz to go, they're in Miami, by the way, to go back to Havana with these 2 secret pills that have been designed by that man you put up there before, the club-footed Sidney Gottlieb, the mad professor of secret weapons for the CIA. The 2 pills are poison pills in capsules. There's Gottlieb, I think, getting ready to testify behind closed doors in a House session in 1978 at the end of his life, or the end of his career. I think he'd already left the CIA at that point. He was kind of like the Fauci of his era, right, Eric? He was kind of untouchable. He was in science. They always tried to get him. They knew that he was a mad scientist who did crazy, despicable Nazi things, but they never ever able to get him.
Good point.
Yeah. Anyway, I just thought of that because Fauci's been testifying lately. But okay, so he gives her these 2 odorless, tasteless poison capsules, and all she's got to do is slip them into Castro's drink when she goes back to the Havana Hilton, which she does do. She flies back to Havana, goes to the Hilton, and in the penthouse, apparently very messy penthouse, according to her, is Fidel Castro. And she has taken the 2 pills. She thought she would be checked at the airport and searched thoroughly. So, but nothing happened. She said they didn't even search her, oddly enough. She took the 2 pills and she put them in a jar of Pond's cold cream. Ladies who remember Pond's facial cream, it's a white cream that women use. Pond's, I don't know if Pond's is still in existence, but my mother had Pond's. And Nirvana was the other one. I forget. There was a couple of them, but Pond's was a big seller. So she put the 2 pills in there. And then when she was with Castro and they started drinking and he was about to do the nasty Castro thing to her, she excused herself, went into the bathroom and dug out the 2 pills. Now, the 2 pills, because they were in the Pond's cold cream, the gelatin dissipated, the pills were covered with this greasy stuff from the cold cream, and she freaks out and she flushes them down the toilet and then goes in and, I presume, having sex with Fidel Castro without the pills. She goes back to Miami and Sturgis has a heart attack and starts smacking her around and gets really violent with her, saying you had to get him killed and you didn't. You're supposed to kill him. You didn't do it. You got scared. And she didn't get scared. She legitimately, that's according to her what happened there. So because of his attempts on Fidel Castro's life, the CIA through the State Department restores his U.S. citizenship, oddly enough, because he's now on our side, which is kind of interesting. But he forms a group called the Anti-Communist Brigade in 1960, and he also hooks up with a cat named Jerry Patrick Hemming. Now, Jerry Patrick Hemming is another guy who is in the JFK folklore. He may or may not have served with Lee Harvey Oswald. He claimed that he did. Big Starker, 230 pounds, 6'4". This is Hemming, another enforcer, another CIA killer. He forms a group called the Intercontinental Penetration Force, Interpin, out of Lacombe, not out of Lacombe, but they're involved. If you saw the movie with JFK when they were raiding the camps in southern Louisiana or in Louisiana in the swamps, and David Ferry was down there, they were training them for a second Bay of Pigs. This is Hemming right here, looking quite ominous. David Ferry is linked to these guys, and this is the group that helps with Frank Sturgis, with Hunt, with Bernard Barker. All are involved in securing volunteers and training personnel for the Bay of Pigs, which becomes a debacle. Okay, so Frank Sturgis wants to kill Castro now, and he's working with the CIA pretty closely. He also is hooked up with a guy named Jack Anderson. Now, Jack Anderson is like, I'm trying to figure out what would be the equivalent of Jack Anderson today. He's the leading columnist in the country. He's the leading investigative reporter in the country. And he has a lot of sources. And one of his sources is Jack Anderson. One of his sources is Frank Sturgis. Frank Sturgis, who was trained by Donovan in black ops propaganda, knows how to use Jack Anderson for whatever the hell they want him to be involved in. So at this point, after the aborted Bay of Pigs, as you saw in the movie JFK, the Kennedys put a kibosh on any attempts to infiltrate. This is after the Cuban Missile Crisis, of course. The deal that they made with Khrushchev was hands off on Cuba. And they didn't advertise this. They didn't publicize this. We pulled out missiles out of Turkey, and the Russians, the Soviets pulled their missiles out of Cuba. And part of the deal was we would never, ever invade Cuba again. That was the deal. But there were people in Miami who didn't give a shit about that deal. And those were the anti-Castro Miami Cubans. They did not care or know, Eric, about that deal. And part of the operation was being run by Frank Sturgis. So these guys, after the failed Bay of Pigs, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, after all this stuff happened, they begin to resurrect what I call, I don't know, nobody really knows the name of this thing, but I call it Bay of Pigs 2, just for simplicity's sake. They begin to rearm, they begin to retrain, they begin to replan, they begin to, again, scheme to invade the island of Cuba. Now, Sturgis is involved in flying over Cuba, dropping leaflets. David Ferry is also flying over Cuba, dropping mice with parachutes on fire to run through the cane fields. So there's a lot of overlaps of people who are not satisfied. There's Ferry. He will also fly over Cuba doing nefarious things to Cuban crops, as is Frank Sturgis doing that as a pilot now. So Frank Sturgis gets arrested again. The machinery of the Kennedy administration is such that they notify all branches of government not to allow any possible Cuban interference. So the FAA actually contacts 5 pilots. One of them is Frank Sturgis, to stop doing things like dropping leaflets on Cuba. And that's on the record. That's on the record. And then that was a tip from the British in the Bahamas. They kind of picked him up in the Bahamas because he was flying out of there. So now the British are helping the Kennedys. Sam Giancana is living in Mexico. In 1963, after this, there's a question of whether Frank Sturgis is involved in Dallas. Now, history has proven to us that both him and Hunt were in Dallas on November 22nd. You can make what you want out of that. Nobody is alleging that Frank Sturgis was one of the gunmen in 1963, and nobody's alleging that Hunt was one of the gunmen in 1963. However, Hunt did lie. He did lose his case against the Spotlight magazine, against Liberty Lobby, that was defended by Mark Lane, that did get him on the stand, that did interrogate him on the stand, that did prove he was lying, and he did lose his case eventually, the defamation case, based on, we'll get into this with Hunt, but Victor Marchetti wrote an article defaming Hunt by claiming Hunt was in Dallas on November 22nd. Marchetti, famously a former CIA operative, will write one of the initial books along with Philip Agee about the inside workings of the CIA. And he, to protect his honor, Hunt sues Marchetti, and he sues Liberty Lobby, which is a right-wing magazine company with different magazines, one of them called Spotlight. And he will initially win the case, and then on appeal, they hire Mark Lane, which we'll get into when we do the Hunt case. But nevertheless, Hunt and Sturgis, despite Sturgis's denials, were in Dallas on November 22nd. So much so that many early investigators pinned him as being one of the three tramps. The other tramp being Woody Harrelson, or Woody Harrelson's father, Charles Harrelson, and the other one being E. Howard Hunt. I guess that's Hunt in the background, supposedly. And then that's the Sturgis one in the middle. And the front one would be... I
thought it was Sturgis in front. Now I'm confused.
No, I think it's the other way around. But nevertheless, the point of the matter is the Harold Doyle turns out to be the Harrelson clone. A guy named John Forrester Gedney turns out to be the Sturgis clone. And this is Harold Doyle. And then Gus Abrams, the last guy with the hat, Abrams turns out to be the E. Howard Hunt clone. We know this because of Ray and Mary LaFontaine, who in 1992, these are two reporters, husband and wife, working for the Houston Post, put out a book. The intro to the book, written by Oliver Stone, is called Oswald Talked, which I highly recommend, which is a great book. And they found the arrest records of the tramps, and they are Harold Doyle, Gus Abrams, and John Gedney.
This is a better shot that it does not look like Sturgis in this shot. Either one of them.
It doesn't matter if it does or it doesn't. The point of the matter is it's not them. And history is now absolved. History will absolve us of these three men. The point of the matter.
Not our comment section.
What's that?
Not our comment section.
Oh, no. Knock yourself out. Knock yourself out. Because remember, every single thing is a conspiracy. So the book in 1991, if you want to read it, a great book called Oswald Talked, covers a lot of other things written by the wonderful reporters from the Houston Post, two veteran investigative reporters who really did a lot of gumshoe investigative work and found the original arrest records of the tramps. I'm sorry to disappoint you. I know it's crushing. I know it's harsh. Sometimes the truth actually hurts, but there's other conspiracies that you can latch onto with this particular case. You don't have to stick around with that conspiracy. I know there's stuff that you think is true, but it may not be. So the Plumbers unit is now something that's going to begin to form with Sturgis, with Barker, with Hunt, put together by Liddy, but not in the beginning. Sturgis is brought into the White House under a different connotation. Sturgis is in a situation before he gets to the White House. This is really odd, so I'm just going to have to explain it to you. He's put in charge of the Cuban Air Force by Castro. Yes, he was put in charge of the Cuban Air Force by Fidel Castro. He's also put in charge of all the casinos in Havana by Fidel Castro. Yes. Oh, look at Hunley. That's a plot twist.
He has a good background.
Didn't see that right. Didn't see that coming. So because Castro wants the casinos to keep making money. He doesn't want to he's not that crazy. So he keeps these casinos going. And who's running them? Frank Sturgis, third base. He's also moonlighting as the head of security for the Cuban Air Force. Now, that's really a weird combination of jobs, but pretty well documented. So he is now approached by guys like Trafficante, like Lansky, and they want to know what's the new system here. You know, they're saying, okay, this is the guy, let's go. Let's cooperate with this guy. And they do. And they begin to run the casinos as the mob with Fiorini and Sturgis as their go-between. And money is pouring into the Castro, their sorely needed Castro coffers. And it does work for a while. And by 1963, though, Trafficante is literally using Sturgis as a bagman. And his love of publicity is what undermines Sturgis with both the CIA and the mob. Both of them are telling him to stay off of TV, stop giving interviews, stop doing all this stuff. But he's got a love affair with doing this. So he is now involved in training the killers. One of his last acts before this, and I think it was around that time, training the killers of Rafael Trujillo down in Dominican Republic, where I traveled on a number of occasions. I was working on a script, and I happened to be there during election week. And they put their soldiers out in the street to make sure there's no chicanery in these elections down there. So it's a different kind of election they have going on there. But he is now mobbed up. He's not a made man. And he is now involved in various scams because he is now forced to figure out a way to survive. So he gets involved. This is really odd. He gets involved in a stolen car ring out of California, out of LA, shipping hundreds of cars to Mexico, Eric, where they're then sent along the way to various ports of call in the Caribbean for people who are ordering stolen cars. And who's on the other end of the stolen car ring? A guy who is in exile, kind of speak, hiding out from the law, named Santo Trafficante. Now, Santo Trafficante will end up in jail in Havana. He will be arrested by Castro's men and put into prison. Now, who comes back again? Is this Trafficante?
Yeah.
Okay. Santo Trafficante will now end up in prison in Havana. Who comes to visit him in the jail to get him out at that time? Third base, Jack Ruby. Jack Ruby shows up with his sidekick, Louis McWillie, and they successfully bring money back and forth from Dallas, from the Campisi brothers, out of the Egyptian lounge where I think I went to eat. I don't know if I took Eric there, but it's a pretty good Italian restaurant still in Dallas, run by the Campisi brothers. And Jack Ruby goes back down to Havana with the money and bribes whoever you got to bribe to get Santo Trafficante out of jail. So Santo Trafficante is now trying to run these casinos, and there's a guy named, maybe you know this name, Sam Giancana. He's living in Mexico running a heroin stolen car ring with the approval of Carlos Marcello and Santo Trafficante. So they're all in on it. And Giancana, is this Sam?
Yeah.
Sam is living in Mexico. And who's sending him the cars? The cars are being sent by Frank Sturgis. This scam involves the Mexican Federal Police and the DFS. And the DFS is doing this. This scam goes all the way into the late 1980s, Eric. Okay? Where they finally, the state of California indicts 13 DFS officials in Mexico, and they're brought to justice in the 80s. Okay. The DFS is the same group that tortured Sylvia Duran, who was the receptionist at the Cuban embassy in Mexico City, who they claimed slept with Oswald and saw Oswald in there. She was picked up by the DFS on the orders of the CIA, which is why I believe those records are still there in the vault at the bottom of the JFK files. I believe that what's down at the bottom is stuff like this, embarrassing the nation of Mexico for doing our bidding. And that is something that we will see later with the embassy break-in. We're going to get to the embassy break-in in Washington, D.C. of Chile. Now, you thought that Watergate was first for the Plumbers. It was not. The embassy of Chile was broken into under the orders of Nixon by the Plumbers unit to put in wiretaps and bugs in Chile because of the attempt to overthrow Allende and the CIA activity. And Richard Helms told Nixon, you can run your own intel operation out of the Chilean embassy as long as, and they funded it, by the way. The CIA gave the White House Plumbers unit, this is before Watergate, before the thing blows up, the Plumbers unit breaks into the Chilean embassy in D.C. to put in bugs and steal documents. So there's a history of this. And that fact, the reason I mention it, was not released to the general public until 1999, Eric. That break-in was not to not embarrass the nation of Chile, which is what I think is going on with the JFK files involving Mexico and Mexico City. Just my opinion. It's just my opinion. So anyway, so Sturgis is now involved in a heroin ring and a stolen car ring, but working with the mob, right? So they begin to come up with a plan. This is the Nixon administration, comes up with a plan to assassinate drug dealers. And they call in Hunt, and they call in Liddy, and they call in some others. And Nixon realizes that drugs are, and he makes many speeches about this that you and I have seen, and he begins to start what's known as, what is it called? The war on drugs. Right, the war on drugs. The war on drugs will involve the assassination of drug dealers internationally and domestically. How many they did, whether they did it or not, I'm not privy to that. But that's why the Plumbers unit is originally formed as an assassination squad to kill drug dealers, not leaders of foreign countries. Nixon justified this as they're killing our youth. Let's take them out. Let's take them out. In fact, he goes so far, this is a little bit off the story, but he goes so far, and I think in Morocco, to kidnap the legendary Red Rodney trumpet player who was wanted on a drug violation as a heroin addict and a dealer, to take him out on a gurney, handcuff, fly him on a U.S. government plane back to the United States to stand trial and be convicted and sent to Kentucky, to the federal prison in Kentucky, where he forms a band with Wayne Kramer, my old friend from the MC5. But that's another story for another day. But Red Rodney was one of the first victims, quote unquote, of Nixon's war on drugs. Now you could say, well, Red Rodney didn't do anything to anybody, but that's not really here nor there for this particular story. Red Rodney will live and survive and get free heroin in the Lexington, Kentucky prison, where even Wayne Kramer and Whitey Bulger was in there too, getting free acid. But Wayne was telling me that they got free drugs, which is why they had that prison. It was their experimental federal prison. But getting back to the story at today, Sturgis gets involved. He's brought in on this assassination drug thing, and Nixon creates the White House Office of Drug Abuse Law Enforcement. It's actually a 1971 Liddy idea, and it's not a bad idea. Office of Drug Enforcement. So they're going to do this themselves, whether you want to or not. And there's a guy named Lou Russell, this old geezer who we talked about, this alcoholic who was involved with McCord, James McCord from the Watergate break-in. There's Lou Russell. Lou Russell is outside the Watergate during the time of the break-in. What he's doing with McCord, we don't know. We'll get into that in the McCord episode. But Lou Russell also works for another guy. He works for a guy named Jack Anderson, the most famous columnist in America. He's the investigator for Jack Anderson. And who does Jack Anderson have over? Here's Jack Anderson. Who does Jack Anderson have over for dinner and have him stay for weeks in his house? Who does he have over there? Frank
Third base?
Frank Sturgis, third base. Frank Sturgis, I'll tell you this much. When Frank Sturgis lands to out of Miami to go to D.C. to break into the Watergate, he brings Martino with him and a couple of the Cubans, right? Who's at the airport greeting someone else? Jack Anderson. He's not there for Frank Sturgis, but he sees Frank Sturgis. And here's Frank Sturgis with his crew coming to break into the Watergate. And he's got to hug and kiss Jack Anderson because he knows him so well. Jack Anderson will later remember this after the break-in and write about it, Eric, in his column about the break-in and Nixon in the White House. Now, one of the people they decide to assassinate, unfortunately, is Jack Anderson. So Jack Anderson is getting leaks, and they don't know where he's getting the leaks from. It's not from Liddy, I'll tell you that much. It may be from Hunt, and it may be from someone else. Sturgis believes, as you saw in that tape, that Bob Bennett was Deep Throat. Now, Bob Bennett was the head of the Mullen Company, which was a CIA cutout company that employed E. Howard Hunt. I don't think so, that it was Bennett. There was too much information inside. I'm sticking with the General Haig thing that we talked about a couple of weeks ago. But anyway, he goes from being involved in drug dealing to being part of assassinating drug dealers, Sturgis. He's literally on the other side of the fence. And at 5/13/72, they break into the Chilean embassy. And what are they looking for in the Chilean embassy? The same thing Sturgis says they're looking for in the Cuban embassy, in the Watergate offices of the DNC. They're looking for a 130-page document involving all of the Cuban assassinations, the JFK, the Bay of Pigs. It's some document that Cuba and the Democrats have put together, like a dossier, they called it, against Trump. This is like their Russian dossier. And Sturgis says this is what they're seeking in Larry O'Brien's office. It's this 132-page document that they saw a cover sheet for when they broke in either to the Chilean embassy or somewhere else. But that's what Sturgis says they were looking for. So I don't know how he knows that, but that's what he says. Now, Sturgis is now working for this hit squad kind of, and becomes part of the break-in unit to go into the embassy. And he goes into the Watergate debacle that night by first going to Howard Johnson's. Everybody goes to this restaurant in Howard Johnson's. It's unbelievable. Even Frank Wills, the black guard, goes down to get some cheeseburgers in the middle of his shift. Everybody's going in there. And he goes in there to meet James McCord. And James McCord is not there, but he brings in one of his Cubans. And who does he see leaving? His hero. Frank Sturgis runs into his hero, Burt Lancaster, who also is leaving the Howard Johnsons after getting 28 flavors of ice cream. I guess that's Baskin Robbins, but Howard Johnson's, this guy's leaving, and he goes, I'm Frank Sturgis. I'm a huge fan, Mr. Lancaster. And he goes, wow, that's really great. That's really good that you're a fan. I really appreciate that. And he says, what are you doing in town? I'm working on a film called Scorpio. And he goes, what's that about? It's about a guy from the CIA who is being turned against by the rest of the CIA, and he's got to run. And it's called Scorpio. A very exciting film. I hope you get to see it. So Frank Sturgis goes to see it afterwards. He comes out, it's after Watergate. He sees Scorpio, and indeed it's a film of a patsy or a rogue CIA agent who is turned against by the agency. And Sturgis says that's us. That's what happened to us. We were patsies in this thing. So don't forget, Marita Lorenz goes before the House. He testifies, by the way, before the Rockefeller Commission about the Kennedy assassination. And I found the testimony. We'll put it up on Locals from members after the show. Fascinating testimony for the Rockefeller Commission. The Rockefeller Commission is the original House Assassinations Committee, 75, set up by Gerald Ford to look into CIA assassinations. Here's the cover page. This document, which is about 80 pages long, testimony of Frank Sturgis. Frank Sturgis and Marita Lorenz still have a relationship. Marita Lorenz will contest to the House Assassinations Committee that Oswald, Frank Sturgis, E. Howard Hunt, and her, and a couple of Cubans all met before the assassination in Miami. She will testify that Sturgis is part of the assassination crew. And that is not good for Frank Sturgis. Nobody buys it. If you read Gaten Fonzie's book, The Last Investigation, Gaten Fonzie being the investigator for Schweiker, the senator from Pennsylvania, he didn't believe it. He didn't believe Lorenz. And a lot of people don't believe Sturgis because he contradicts himself, Eric, so many times that he is a bastion of misinformation. Sometimes contradicting himself about who he knows, when he knew it, who he knew, when he knew them, and everything else. But Barker and Sturgis are completely tight with Jack Anderson, which I find to be interesting. So Liddy decides that Anderson must die. And you just go, wow, that's a little much. He's a big columnist. He's very famous, but he's doing so much damage to the Nixon administration that they begin to plot his assassination. And this becomes one of the biggest stories to ever come out of Watergate. They stalk him to find out what time he's walking his dog, what time he's jogging, that whole thing. And what Liddy says is, and Hunt agrees, the best type of CIA assassination is one that looks like an abortive or actual mugging. That's their number one way of killing people. And that is easier to explain. It looks like a robbery. There was a guy who may have worked for the DNC, who may have gotten some emails, who may have been mugged on the streets of DC and killed. So they may still be using that type of method. I'm not sure. You may want to ask around about him and how he died with the emails of a presidential candidate. This is a Bernie Sanders supporter. But anyway, so
it rhymes with ditch.
What's that?
It rhymes with ditch.
Yeah. How's that sound, by the way? Are we good?
It sounds fine.
Okay. Just want to make sure that people get this. Now, he doesn't like Bernard Barker, and I can't say what Bernard Barker is into that he doesn't like him, and it's a depraved sexual thing, which I won't explain here. We will explain it during the Bernard Barker episode, but put it this way: Bernard Barker is a freak, and well, they're all kind of freaks. They all have different. This is Bernard Barker. His nickname is Macho, and he's anything but macho, as to quote Frank Sturgis. Anyway, so when they break into the Watergate, you wonder why, for this quote-unquote second-rate burglary, they need such a heavyweight veteran as Frank Sturgis. The guy that stands out here as not really fitting in is Frank Sturgis. The Cubans, I get, they have different skills, breaking locks and entering and, doing what they're doing. And McCord is involved in recording and photographing. That's McCord's specialty. By the way, James McCord is played by Chris Bauer, a friend of mine, in this gaslit episodic I was telling you about on Starz that's now on Prime, with Julia Roberts playing Martha Mitchell and Sean Penn playing John Mitchell. It's not very good, but I was shocked to see Chris Bauer playing James McCord last night. Anyway, so Sturgis goes in there and he meets Burt Lancaster, and he says, a lot of people think I look like you. You ever say, who says that to a star? You go, and so people look and go, you know what? You kind of do look like Burt Lancaster. He says that people have told him this. I mean, maybe if we saw the two together at a certain angle, a certain part of their careers. But the reality of it is when they break into the Watergate, he doesn't really know what's going on, Frank Sturgis. Sturgis thinks they're going for these documents from the Cubans to the DNC, and that it will somehow make the DNC, to sum it up, look linked to Castro, which is not so difficult to do. I mean, Karen Bass, the mayor of LA, went to Castro's Cuba 28 times when she was in college to help the Castro revolution. So now she's the head of Los Angeles. So it's not that bizarre of a possibility that the DNC and Castro were linked together. You have the hands-off thing with Kennedy, blah, blah, blah. Nixon is not happy about Cuba, but he's honoring the hands-off thing. And as Sturgis says in that intro, there's a lot of information that Nixon was seeking from Helms and was not getting it from Helms, because Helms was using it to actually not blackmail, but to hold it over Nixon. He wasn't getting Nixon to do anything, but he didn't want to give up the family jewels, to quote a phrase, just because Nixon requested it. Helms was a tough old codger. He was a tough old dog, and he wasn't going to cooperate. But again, these are all CIA people who are breaking into the Watergate. Nixon doesn't know who they are, what they're doing. This is being run by John Dean and actually being run by Liddy. And Liddy's an FBI guy. He's not a CIA guy. He doesn't know what's going on. I mean, these guys have their own agenda. James McCord is Sturgis' second from the left. I'll tell you something funny about Sturgis. When the DC detectives, the intel unit, comes in to arrest them, and they're hiding behind the desks, Sturgis said, we got as far back in the offices as we possibly could, but they must have seen us anyway. So they say, with guns drawn, they start yelling, let's see your hands, put your hands up, let's see some hands. Sturgis calmly had the presence of mind to simply say, don't get nervous. No one here has a weapon. And he calmly says this to the cops in this chaos.
He was a cop. He was a cop.
Right. Exactly.
He knows procedure, so makes sense.
Anyway, these guys are arrested, and Sturgis does some federal time, and he gets out and goes back to doing media. And that's why you see that thing in 1978 with Bill O'Reilly, on the local news, because he is now called before these different committees, and he's squawking. Now, what is he squawking about? He's squawking about the CIA's limited hangout, that Lee Harvey Oswald and Castro were in on this, and that the Soviets masterminded this. This was the old limited hangout. And that's what Sturgis is chirping about. Sturgis went around for years trying to do the bidding of the CIA, that this was a KGB plot organized by Castro through Castro's secret police, utilizing Lee Harvey Oswald as the gunman, and that Oswald had gone to Havana. In fact, J. Edgar Hoover said that he'd gone to Havana, and he was wrong. On the day of the assassination, he said that he'd been to Havana a bunch of times, and none of that was true. He never went to Havana. Anyway, this was the attempt by Sturgis post-Watergate, post-conviction. There's a picture. He goes on Geraldo. If you have a little footage of this is really good, with Geraldo Rivera.
To the Schweiker committee, that I believe what I know, and I'm sorry I couldn't actually tell you everything that I told the committee, that I believe that there was a conspiracy, Americans involved in the conspiracy, plus several countries who were aware and also involved in this conspiracy that killed the President of the United States.
Were you involved in that conspiracy?
Myself, no.
Do you know that there have been allegations that Castro was not involved, and that came from the intelligence community of the United States, frustrated and bitter because President Kennedy, after the Bay of Pigs, the abortive invasion, Bay of Pigs, that fiasco, pulled back the CIA and pulled back people like yourself and said, no more counter-revolutionary activities in Cuba. that that bitterness generated an assassination attempt on the president's life. How do you respond to those charges?
There was bitterness, but I doubt very much whether federal intelligence organization in the United States would involve themselves with killing the president of the United States.
Where were you on November 22nd, 1960?
In Miami, Florida.
And who will tell us that in fact is true?
Well, there's proof.
Yeah.
Did you know Louis McWillie?
I believe I met Louis McWillie in Havana.
Maybe.
There was a time at the early part of 1959 where Castro, when he came over to the Air Force Base, where he needed, he asked me really to take charge of the gambling casinos for the Cuban government.
So while you were a CIA agent, you were also Minister of Gambling for Castro. So you knew Louis McWillie.
I knew a number of the people who were in control of the
Specifically, did you know him, Louis McWillie, Jack Ruby's friend?
I really couldn't swear to it, but I believe I have met Mr.
He was the manager of the Tropicana Club.
Right on.
I met him.
Did you ever meet Jack Ruby?
No, I don't think so.
What do you think about, we have stories now that there were two men hired by CIA operatives, John Roselli and Sam Giancana, two mafia hoods. They were hired by the U.S. government to assassinate Fidel Castro. Did you know anything about those two men, Frank?
No.
Do you think that their deaths within a year of each other were related?
Well, there's two possibilities. One, the Cuban intelligence organization probably sent agents to kill him. They have that. They have that much power. To prove that, it's on record in the United States government that Castro did send Mexican agents to the United States to kill myself and also the ex-chief of the Cuban Air Force who came into exile, which I arranged his escape from Cuba. So Castro is capable of killing people. He's done it in South America.
And your theory is that he was behind the assassination?
No, it's not my theory. I think the facts are there. The evidence is there with testimony that I have given and certain facts that Fidel Castro was involved in a conspiracy to kill the president of the United States.
There we go.
This is, that was a good place to cut it right there. I mean, this is why he's being trotted out at this point in the late 70s, is to sell this conspiracy theory that it was orchestrated by Castro. This is just me, but I believe that Johnny Roselli and Sam Giancana were killed by Frank Sturgis.
Could be. By the way, if people are watching this on replay and you don't know what we're talking about, you'll have to watch on Rumble or Locals because that means there's a copyright dispute. So
well, let's keep our fingers crossed. But I believe that Roselli and Giancana were not killed by Castro's agents. I think they were killed by Frank Sturgis. And I have no evidence of this. It's just he was able to get close to them. He knew Roselli and he knew Giancana. And I think that Cuban intelligence agents were not able to get into Sam Giancana's kitchen and have spaghetti with him while he's about to testify before the House Assassinations Committee. Again, that's the extent of just a hunch. Now, weirdly enough, Frank Sturgis in the 80s, like everyone else, ends up running a video store in Miami. And that's kind of where the story of Frank Sturgis comes to an end. It's like Nijin Cao Ki, the former vice president of South Vietnam. He ends up running a liquor store in Garden Grove. A lot of these guys end up running stores or restaurants or places of trade at the end of their lives or at the beginning of their lives. I found that to be quite repetitive of these storylines. They're not ending up with blue-collar jobs. They end up running something, small, but running something. In his case, it was a video store. I don't know if it was Blockbuster, but it was in the 80s. So that would be really funny. That would be really funny. But anyway, the Jack Anderson assassination is called off at the last minute. I don't know if it's by John Mitchell or whether Mitchell was privy to this or John Dean. Didn't go up the ladder that far, but there is tape recordings of Nixon discussing not the killing of Jack Anderson, but the problem of leaks with Jack Anderson. So there's a lot of room for debate. I'm not saying I have all the answers, but I'm just laying out a lot of dots here today about Frank Sturgis, Frank Fiorini, whatever you want to call him, he is a part of history in terms of Jack Ruby, the JFK assassination, and, you know, Marita Lorenz saying he was part of the squad that went to Dallas with weapons and, you know, blah, 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 the Hallandale house with the Cubans on, which was a safe house that they had that Oswald had infiltrated. And these were some of the Walker guys, the Cubans. So there's a lot of smoke. There's a lot of smoke around Frank Sturgis. We may never know his complete role in these various events, but he does end up in the Nixon administration as one of the Watergate burglars. And that's kind of the most interesting part of the story, and the backstory with the CIA in Cuba and the Caribbean. He works with David Morales down there, the Indian, the big Indian, and Morales may be linked to the assassination as well. He was one of the, David Morales was one of the David Atlee Phillips. David Atlee Phillips was under David Morales and later becomes his supervisor. I'm not really sure how that happened in the CIA parlance, but Helms in the lawsuit, I'll just close with this. Helms in the lawsuit that I discussed, the Liberty Lobby lawsuit against Hunt, testified in that lawsuit under oath that Frank Sturgis was a contract employee of the CIA and that Hunt was a full-time employee of the CIA. So that's been an established fact. No matter what Frank Sturgis has said on numerous occasions, the head of the CIA declared that in open court. So that's been established. Now, Hunt's alibi is going to be part of the Hunt episode because it's a little shaky as to where he is on November 22nd. But we'll just leave it at that for right now, and we'll get into Hunt or McCord in one of the upcoming episodes.
Wow, definitely a lot there. Definitely not there. Dustin, of course, comes in with a little humor. Rumor has it Sturgis sold the last Betamax before VCR cornered the market. He means VHS, but yeah. Pamela Clifton saying happy Tuesday to my two JFK, etc. friends.
Mm-hmm.
And also sent a $20 super chat. Thank you very much. TB said, did Frank Sturgis have ties to Barry Seal and his alleged drug running escapade?
Yes, the answer is yes.
And to Chuck Wu, I don't know. As someone who spends hours on the road daily, this show is a godsend. Love you guys from Nigeria.
Whoa. Dude, that's crazy. Is this a come on for a Nigerian?
I don't know, but is this the first?
If we cash the $9.99, is he going to ask for 100 back?
I don't know.
Yeah,
I think you mean to say he has money for us.
Right.
He's a prince,
right?
And we just need to respond. Helena Olegic, $20 Canadian. Thank you. And White Strat 64 from Australia. Carry on.
Wow.
This is a great international audience here.
It's Warrior an international episode. Castro spoke English. Look, Putin speaks perfect English too. I know it's shocking, but a lot of these people speak pretty damn good English. They just are not great at it completely. You could see Castro is asking his interpreter some particular words.
Didn't Castro go to school here for a bit?
I don't know if he went to school here, but the point is he knew how to speak English.
Yeah, and a lot of
he wanted to play baseball. If he didn't overthrow Batista, he would have been playing for the Yankees, and they could have used him.
And you would have liked him.
I would. He was a great pitcher. What can I say? The guy knew how to pitch.
It took a wrong turn.
Took a wrong turn.
Is it true that Sturgis privately owned a B-25 that he used in anger to bomb a plantation owner in the Caribbean?
I've never heard that.
Wow.
I wouldn't put it past him. I've never heard that story, but there's so many Sturgis stories. I was just trying to focus on the stuff I could verify. I don't know about the B-25.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
St. Castro played for the Havana Blunts.
That's right. They were very blunt, and he played with a cigar in his mouth.
That is funny. That's funny. Wow. That's everybody's going to have to watch this a couple times because
there's a lot
I couldn't even keep up with the pictures. You'll notice I was distracted. There's so many pictures.
There's a lot of
much
stuff in here, and it covers so many decades, going back to, Wild Bill Donovan. And I mean, you could do a whole episode of Sturgis fighting the Japanese in the jungles of Okinawa and Guadalcanal, where he, did duty there, heroic duty. So a lot of these guys have heroic backgrounds, in terms of military. And we'll see that when we do the General Haig episodes, how big of a deal General Haig was in the shit when he was in Vietnam. So we'll cover some of that military aspects of General Haig's physical military activity in Vietnam. But yeah, I mean, he was doing a job here. Especially with Marita Lorenz, he was running her, and she was obviously a loose cannon or whatever you want to call it, but she was just one of many attempts to kill Castro, and it didn't work out. But she did go through it. Was she a double agent? Who knows? I mean, Castro was a lover. She may have been playing, playing them like a fiddle, Sturgis and Hunt. I don't know. I mean, the proof's in the pudding. She didn't kill Castro. So maybe it was just her ability to get information out of Sturgis and Hunt that helped Castro. I don't know why this guy, Castro, would put Frank Sturgis in charge of the Air Force and the casinos is crazy. It's absolutely crazy. But it is because he cemented his relationship with Sturgis, fighting in the jungles, fighting in the mountains with Sturgis side by side. So there's a lot to be said about that relationship just from the guerrilla activity and the ability of Frank Sturgis to train actual guerrillas on how to fight, which he did with the Castro people. So there's a lot of loyalty that I'm sorry, I didn't see that, but there's a lot of loyalty that Castro is rewarding Sturgis with. That revolution may have not have been possible without Frank Sturgis.
All right. Sergeant Willie says, I heard a rumor Castro had a tryout with the Braves. True or false?
He tried out with, I don't know, tryout. They send scouts down to Havana all the time, and he was one of the people they scouted and sent a tryout. He was just, I think, multiple major league scouts had looked at him. Now, the same could be true 40 years later with Yasiel Puig. Yasiel Puig was on the Cuban national team and was a beast, and they got him to defect to the United States. He ended up playing for the Dodgers, getting a raft in shark-infested waters with his mother on board a raft through the drug cartels of Mexico City. So you could do a whole story on people who fled Cuba. We got a guy now named Paez who came from Cuba, the Dodgers. A lot of them had to go through incredible hurdles to overcome to get here, Eric.
Well,
even now,
one of the top marathoners, he won the Boston Marathon. I think he won the Olympics for us. Mm-hmm. He and his father escaped Cuba.
Okay.
I forget his name. He's also a coach and at Nike. I totally can't remember his name, but anyway, he escaped that.
Well, the important thing about Sturgis, not the important thing, one of the important things about Sturgis is his connection to Jack Ruby and the gun running of Ruby and the involvement of Ruby as a courier and as a money courier and a gun runner for the Campeses and for Marcello and for the groups that are trying to play both sides against the middle. Again, it's a little confusing as to where these guns went, if they went to Castro early on, or as I think they were going to Carlos Prio, the former president, trying to restore him. And this is just my hunch.
Could be. Al Gonzalez says, got a nice package in the mail today via Leslie. Superb AUS glass that is now filled with a margarita.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, Marita Lorenz will end up working with the New York City Police Department Intelligence Unit involving drugs and some other stuff in New York. I don't know if Al was around then. This sounds like a little later.
Not that old.
Well, no, but it's in the 80s, so I don't know. I was around in New York in the 80s. I'm still alive. People. It's not that long ago, Eric. I'm not talking about 1963.
Okay, fair enough. All right, well, one thing that everybody might want to do in order to get through this and research all the facts and check it for themselves, because these are all opinions, you know, a little bit of coffee.
Yeah, you may have to stay up all night with this stuff, Eric, right?
I think so. And thank you, Alberto Salazar.
Okay.
Top of the line marathoner.
Wasn't Ruiz the phony woman marathoner?
Yes.
Thank you. Came in at the end.
Yeah, so she jumped on the subway.
Right. I remember her. I don't remember Salazar. I remember Ruiz.
Okay, well, he actually ran it. And like I think passed out. I mean, it was a pretty scary thing. But anyway, America's Untold Stories Supreme Breakfast Blend. It's a mix of the Mexican Chiapa beans with the Indonesian Sumatra. And I was reminded today that it is actually certified organic.
Wow.
Not just organic, but certified. There's an entire process.
Wow.
In order to do that. A lot of things are thrown around like organic this, organic that, or blah, 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 blah. This is actually certified. They have to go through a procedure. Everything that Moondos does actually is certified organic except for one flavor. So I think
don't mention it. Don't mention that one.
Well, we don't care about that. We care about AUS Supreme Breakfast Blend, so everybody can get off their fat asses, like we're getting off our fat asses too.
When you drink
research this,
yeah, you'll be involved in the revolution very quickly. If you drink some of this stuff, you'll be storming the Bastille within no time.
That's the goal, and there is a link in the description to check it out, or just go to americasuntoldstories.com/coffee.
.com. Very nicely played. Very nicely played. This is one of the books. Dude, I just want to show you the size of these books I have to read regarding the episodes from the Watergate Book Fund donation. People has gotten me this book, which has Lamar Waldron. He's got his own opinions on certain things, but a lot of these books have a lot of great footnotes and stuff on Watergate, the mafia, Nixon, the CIA. I mean, Nixon was so not immune to the mafia. Let me put it that way. I mean, Mickey Cohen raised a lot of money for him, and a lot of these mobsters, you know, decided to be on both sides, like we saw with Kennedy, 1960. We learned about a lot of the mob out of Chicago, but they also tried to help Nixon at the same time, trying to be on both sides, depending on who would win. So I think I know it's a way to go, but I'm saying they've always alleged that the Kennedys were mobbed up, and it didn't make much sense because it really is both sides that were mobbed up. And a lot of it is in these books that the people have donated indirectly to. So thank you.
All right. Now, the last thing is we have Oswald, you know, who always takes us over to locals, but takes us out. But I just want to let you know that Oswald is not alone. There are some new fellows that are in
What the hell is this? Who is this guy?
This is a monkey. Right. And we also have new to the shop, a bunny.
Holy cow, look at the bunny.
And if that's
funny, bunny.
Not great. We also now have a panda bear. So the Groubert has a panda friend.
I'm going to order this today. I got to get that one. No. I want.
I was trying to come up with a name for them, and somebody suggested we could just call these the tramps.
Oh, that's funny. But they're not the real tramps. Harold
They're not the real
Gus Abrams and John Gedney.
Okay, but anyway, if folks are wanting to add some company with Oswald, if they have
I'm getting that panda. I'm getting that freaking panda. Don't sell that out.
Well, you better move quickly.
I am going to move quickly.
Dustin Russell. Wow. He climbed Mount Everest in 3 hours after a pot of that coffee.
You know what? He's right. You can do a lot of things. A guy apparently turned on the gas in a bank in Youngstown while he was drinking the coffee and just blew the entire building to smithereens. I don't know how, just from that coffee.
Well, yeah, he was so stressed out that he cut the line.
He was so stressed out and shaking from the power of the coffee that as a settling torch cut the gas line, blowing him and everyone else to kingdom come.
Anyway, it's actually not that much of a hot coffee, but it is a really good blend.
Okay.
It will get you up, and it's nice, well-rounded, mellow. And like my big requirement with these guys now, they've spoiled me.
Right.
I don't have to have cream. So
Oh, you said that, right.
I just drink it black, and it tastes just nice, warm, full.
Here's a great quote. E. Howard Hunt proves again that he's a master storyteller, unlike Groubert, as well as a man of action. In this compelling narrative of violence and sex in the Caribbean, he exploits the knowledge he learned so well as one of the key figures in the Bay of Pigs, Eric, invasion. And in his 20 years as a CIA agent, from inside the men's blah, blah, blah. It's funny because David Atlee Phillips has a book, Hunt has a book. I mean, novels. These guys all want to be novelists. And that's, yeah.
All right. Oswald's been compromised. He's a patsy.
Oswald now has a crew of conspirators. He's not alone. It's a limited hangout.
Fair play for Cuba, man.
Fair play for Cuba and Lee Harvey Oswald. This is Walter Cronkite saying goodnight to America. And I guess we go over to the local side.
That's where we're headed to. We can discuss.
This is Walter Cronkite. Come over to locals. Cronkite becomes Nixon after a while. So this is Richard Nixon.
The advanced range of our voiceover.
This is Frank Gorshin. I am the Riddler playing Nixon, playing Frank Gorshin. It would be wrong. We could raise $1 million. I know where we could get it. I know.
But where's Ruth Payne?
Oh, I don't know about Ruth Payne. She's not even getting involved. Ruth Payne becomes Mike Tyson if you get enough coffee in you. I'll tell you that much.
So let's discuss it more at locals.
On locals, we'll talk about the secret voices that are mostly in my head.